So this is our first state of the franchise, and in this, we're basically going to look at all the different Saints positions, and we're going to look at where they are right now and where they might be moving forward. So let's start with the tackles. So Nick, talk about the tackles that we have right now. Are they under contract? Are they good? And just kind of give us some more information on both of them.
Terron Armstead, our left tackle, he's one of our most important players. He's one of the best offensive tackles in the league. He doesn't get a lot of credit, actually, as one of the best tackles in the league. The line play in the NFL is so horrible right now. A lot of that has to do with the defensive line being so much more athletic than the players on the offensive line. And a lot of it has to do with college transitions. These guys are playing spread offenses in college. They're not doing a lot of power run concepts. And a lot of these techniques that they're doing in college are not really transitioning well to the NFL. So when you have an elite offensive tackle like Terron Armstead, it is extremely valuable, especially when you have a great quarterback like Drew Brees. Armstead's only weakness is that he gets hurt all the time. He's never played in a full 16-game season in 5 years as a starter. He's only played in 27 of 48 possible games in the last 3 years. But when he plays, the Saints offense is so much better. And I'm not kidding. Like, honestly, a lot of people don't think that the offense could a left tackle could really make that much of a difference. But I'm telling you, Drew Brees' splits with and without Terron Armstead on the field are substantially stark. I mean, Drew Brees is so much better when Terron Armstead is playing. And Armstead's in his prime. He's young. We've signed him to a huge contract. He'll be here a while. We just really need him to stay healthy. Last year, for example, Armstead missed 5 games, and it was right during the time that Drew Brees kind of had his slump. You know, it was weeks 11 through 15, and that was kind of right when our offense took a step back. And Terron Armstead certainly had a lot to do with that.
So what about Ramczyk?
Ryan Ramczyk, awesome. Probably the best run blocker on the team, I would say. And he's in his rookie deal, which is significant because he ended up being a hit in the draft. So now we have him for the next 3 years, and we only have to pay him $2.5 million for the next 2 years, and that third year will increase. But $2.5 million for the next 2 years. He's going to be a Saint until 2022. And Ramczyk was able to start every game last year, all 17 games. I will say that when I talk about the starters and the games played, I'm excluding the Week 17 game where all the starters pretty much sat out for at least a half. I'm excluding that because I don't think it's really relevant. But he started 17 of 17 meaningful games for the Saints. And I also think he's probably a top 12 offensive tackle in this league. So the Saints have, I would argue, the best offensive tackle duo in the NFL. And like I said, offensive tackle is one of the most important positions in the National Football League.
Generally speaking, our tackle is more important than the interior line, and is that true for the Saints?
Yes and no. It's actually a great question because the Saints are one of the only teams that I would argue that the interior offensive line is probably just as important as offensive tackles. Now, the Saints' strength is definitely their offensive tackles. Like I said, Armstead and Ramczyk are two, Pro Bowl guys. I mean, they are really good, and they're going to be good for a long time. But interior offensive line, I would argue, is just as important just for the Saints because of Drew Brees' lack of height. And not only is it just kind of a vision thing, like it helps to have offensive linemen who get good push over the middle so he can kind of see over the line. He's not going to be able to do that if the interior offensive line is getting pushed around and bullied. And I will say this about the interior offensive line. We noticed in playoff games, defensive tackles, Aaron Donald, Fletcher Cox, Eagles and Rams. I mean, they were kind of all over Drew Brees. And the interior offensive line didn't play as well as it has. And that's a shame because the Saints really do put a premium on solidifying those three guys. We paid Larry Warford to a pretty huge contract. He's been steady but not spectacular. Max Unger, you remember we traded Jimmy Graham for him. So that was obviously a big deal. And Andrus Peat, we spent a lot of capital on him as well because we picked him in the top 12 overall of the first round when we had so many needs on defense. And that was a very, I wouldn't say hated pick, but very confusing pick at the time for Saints fans who really wanted to solidify the defense. My point is that all three of our interior offensive line starters, the Saints paid a very, very heavy price for. So it just kind of shows the emphasis that the team puts on the interior.
Okay, so break down the individual interior offensive linemen because you talked about how important they are, and I guess I want to know, are those players as good as they need to be given how important it is to us?
I would argue, unfortunately, not. I think Andrus Peat has, kind of a subpar career so far. He really had a down season. He battled a lot of injuries and he had a horrible game against the Eagles, against Fletcher Cox. Again, he was playing with a broken hand, so it's tough to evaluate there. But Andrus Peat has never really developed into the player that we kind of saw when we drafted him. We were actually kind of considering him a long-term right tackle because he had that much athleticism and size. And we have Armstead at left tackle, and we ended up drafting Ramczyk, so we just kind of put Andrus Peat at left guard, but tried to stick him in one position so he wasn't floating around the offensive line. And that kind of crippled his early season development, but he had a down year, and he's owed $9.5 million this year. That's his cap hit this year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints kind of look to see if any team with a lot more cap room than we have, see if any team like maybe the Raiders or someone or the Niners would be interested in trading for him. Unger has an 8.7 cap hit for 2019, and it only cost us $1.75 million to cut him. And he's going to be a free agent anyway in 2020. And he's 33 years old, and his play has kind of been declining. So I could see us. It'd be tough to walk away from Unger. It seems like he's a team captain. It seems like he's kind of the leader of the offensive line. But like I said, if they were to cut him, it really wouldn't surprise me that much. And Larry Walford's kind of been a steady but not spectacular player. He's kind of right in line with an above average right guard starter. Overall, the interior offensive line has been underwhelming, and I do think that the Saints will probably try to address that, at least from the depth perspective, this offseason.
So what about our reserves, though?
Well, we had Jermon Bushrod, a former Saint. He came back to the team, and he filled in. He started weeks 10 through 15 at left tackle for Armstead. And like I said, that was kind of when the Saints went into a little offensive slump. It's hard to say how much of that was Bushrod's fault, but Terron Armstead's a significantly better pass protector and run blocker than Jermon Bushrod is. And I did kind of notice the difference when Jermon Bushrod was in there. For example, Terron Armstead played 12 games this year, and he allowed 13 total pressures, and he had 2 penalties. And Jermon Bushrod allowed 11 total pressures and 2 penalties, and he only started 5 games. So similar numbers in terms of what they allowed, in terms of sacks, hits, hurries, and pressures. But again, Armstead played 12 games, and Bushrod played only 5 games, so that shouldn't happen there. Josh Larivius was a guard for us, and he started a few games. He started weeks 1, 3, and 7. He was kind of filling in for 3 games that Andrus Peat missed. But Larivius was not very good, and he's a free agent. I don't really expect to sign Larivius or Jermon Bushrod, who are both free agents. Larivius allowed 9 pressures on 121 pass protection snaps, which is not a good ratio there. And lastly, Will Clapp, former LSU offensive lineman. A lot of people were really happy that we finally drafted an LSU player. It was in the 7th round, but he allowed 11 pressures on 57 pass protection snaps. 1 out of every 5 pass protection snaps, he would allow a pressure, which is not good at all. He is still under contract, but we'll see what kind of role he has going forward. I don't think the Saints are going to be relying on him anytime soon to be starting.
Nick, you already talked about Armstead getting hurt a bunch. So is that something that happens to all of our offensive linemen, or is it just more or less limited to him?
Offensive linemen tend to get hurt probably, I would argue, maybe more than other positions just because they're taking such a beating down there in the trenches. There's just so much contact that goes on each play. But overall, the Saints offensive line has been able to stay pretty healthy. Like Max Unger started every game last year. Larry Walford started every game last year. And Ryan Ramczyk started every game last year. So the entire right side of our line was extremely healthy for the entire season, which is pretty rare, I guess. It's not, I wouldn't say rare, but it's pretty unlikely. Normally, if you're going to have an entire 3 out of starting 5 offensive linemen play every single game, it's more likely than not that players are going to miss time there. Andrus Peat played 14 of 17 games, which is pretty good. And Armstead, like I said, he did play in 12 games. So overall, we made 77 of 85 possible starts in the meaningful games. So there was only 8 missed starts by our entire, 5 offensive linemen. So that ranks, in the top 10 in the NFL in terms of fortunate health there for the offensive line. So I would say overall, if anything, next year it's probably more likely that we should expect a little more injuries from the rest of the players, and maybe Terron Armstead, who's probably the most valuable offensive lineman that we have, one of the most valuable players that we have. Maybe he'll be able to finally string together a full season of 16 games.
So that wraps it up for the Saints. I think we've done a good job covering the offensive line, and I think next week's State of the Franchise, we should cover the running backs. So this is our first State of the Franchise, and in this, we're basically going to look at all the different Saints positions, and we're going to look at where they are right now and where they might be moving forward. So let's start with the tackles. So, Nick, talk about the tackles that we have.